Thanks, Barb. And thank you all. It's amazing to be here. I was so inspired to sit here through your commitments. And I wasn't able to be here for the whole conference this year. It's just the first time. But I did follow it a little bit on Twitter over the weekend. So thank you for those of you who are tweeting. And I can tell it's been a really special event, both from that and from the power and the energy from this morning. One person had tweeted a quote from Commander Hadfield that said, "The impossible things happen if you get enough smart people working together." And I couldn't agree more with that. And then someone else tweeted, "Problems, hindering forces, solutions towards sustainability are clearly defined and understood. Why haven't we acted yet?" Isn't that interesting? Especially in light of the fact that if we get smart people to work together, then powerful things can happen. So I want to dive deeply into the paradox of those two truths and other ideas and questions in just a couple minutes. But first, first things first. Over dinner last night, when I told my kids, my 3 kids, I was going to be speaking at a conference in front of 200 people or more, they asked me if I was going to tell a joke. And so I asked them if they thought I should, and they said yes. So I asked them what kind of joke I should tell, and they said a knock-knock joke, because what other kind of joke is there really for if you're a 7, a 5, or a 2.5-year-old boy? So I promised them I'd tell you a knock-knock joke, and so on the way here last night, I was Googling knock-knock jokes, trying to find one about in sustainability or environmentalism or something, and really, it is amazing how few good knock-knock jokes there are out there about sustainability and environmental issues. So I found myself having to actually make up my own, and I took the whole ride from the airport to here without Google anymore, and just kind of thinking of my own. And I'm really proud of what I came up with. So here it is. And if you would just, sort of honor the effort here by making sure you laugh, because that would be great, okay? Okay, so, knock, knock. Who's there? Bio. Bio who? Bio beans organic. Okay. Okay. The great thing about 2, 5, and 7-year-old boys is that they still think their dad is hilarious. So they're going to laugh. They're going to laugh really hard. I won't tell them how long it took you to laugh. Thank you. Okay, so why am I here other than that to be closing Keynote? Bless the cooperators. They've decided to pick Keynote speakers from the 2 polar opposite ends of the I know that guy spectrum. Or I've heard of that guy. I've heard of that guy spectrum. But the truth is I know the cooperators really well, as Barb has mentioned, and they know me really well. And I think they asked me, and Barb just confirmed it, they asked me to come here because they know that not that long ago I was you. And they knew me then. So how many of you can remember your parents' 40th birthday? Cool. Yeah, I was amazed to realize that maybe is one of my first memories. I do actually remember at least my the neighbors when I grew up, their 40th birthday, and maybe my own parents. I remember the Lordy Lordy Look Who's 40 parties and the yellow or the pink flamingos and so on. And so yeah, now my next birthday will be my 40th. And that is just stunning to me. I cannot believe it. And so there's lesson number 1 for sustainability changemakers is time flies. Honestly. It really does. So more on that later. My connection to the cooperators goes back to when I was your age, almost 20 years. And I had a mentor who was a senior vice president with cooperators. I had the good fortune of a special relationship with Dennis Dieters. I don't think Dennis is here, is he? No. And he connected me to the cooperators back then when I was involved with ISEC. And this remarkable organization has been with me from my time as a young student leader all the way to now being a seasoned sustainability professional, almost 20 years later. And I really resonated with something that I think it was Grayson said this morning when she mentioned, well, two things. One, she said, don't be afraid to be the counter-narrative. And that really resonated with me because I think that is a really important message as you're setting out in your careers at the stage you're at. And the second thing was that she talked about how suddenly, and it seemed like quite to her amazement, that her heroes have become her colleagues. And I thought that was great too, and that happens quickly as well as you're in this, and that has been my experience as well. And you heard from one of them this morning, Kathy, who I consider a hero. And there've been others as well. And I just want to encourage you to realize how fast time flies as you are setting out on your journey. So I sort of helped found the Natural Step in Canada about 12 years ago. I was introduced to it as an international organization 15 years ago. And when I was introduced to it, I realized I had been interested in sustainability and sustainable business even before that, but I realized I'd found the thing. And I think you know that feeling when you've kind of found the thing. That's going to be what you focus on. It doesn't necessarily have to take the form of an organization. In my case, it did, but it's also a movement, it's an idea, it's a project, and you really realize you can invest in it, and there's a deep commitment to it. That happened for me. And for those of you who don't know the Natural Step, well, there's lots to learn about it and lots of ways to learn about it, courses and materials, and I know you've had a little bit of exposure to it, and also to some of my colleagues, Josh and Tamara, who've been here for the whole weekend. So I encourage you to learn more. It's a great organization, and I'm not going to say too much more than that. It continues to inspire me to be involved with it. Anyway, one of the advantages of having been in your shoes, for me, is that I'm also conscious of the fact that as the closing keynote, late in the morning, after what is surely has been an extraordinary evening, I'm sure, that probably half of you haven't slept. And, well, it doesn't seem to have actually mattered all that much, I must say, in this morning. But just for the sake of those of you where that phenomenon is starting to affect you, I'm going to make my points right now really simply and shortly. It's just two little pieces of advice. One that I suspect is familiar, and the other maybe a little less so. You're going to be nice and short and simple, and then those of you who need to can doze off while I elaborate on those two things for the rest of the talk, okay? And you can do it without worrying that you've missed the most important part. So my two messages to you as sustainability leaders. One, believe, be passionate and powerful, and know that you are right. Number two, listen. Be empathetic and polite. Know that you are wrong. That's it. Okay. So, you can go ahead and doze off now. And you might have noticed that those 2 points are, in a way, kind of opposites. And so I guess that's lesson number 2 for sustainability changemakers, is you're going to need to learn to get comfortable with ambiguity. Not just when I talk, but in your careers and in your day-to-day work. As one of the great poets and artists of my generation, Gord Downie, said, "We will live to survive our paradoxes." How can you be right and wrong at the same time? So that's the story for the non-dozers. And you might notice that I have not emphasized in my key messages what you should know, and nor what you should do. Okay? I know you're going to act. We heard it this morning. I know you're going to follow through on all the commitments you made here. You don't need me to urge you on to do that. You are action-oriented people, and you're going to act in ways that I can't even imagine. So what I can offer you today is going to be more about how you be while you do. So two things. Let's start with the one that I think is maybe more familiar territory. One is believing in your power to affect change. Now, I think you all do, but whether you see yourself as such yet or not, you are a change maker. And that means that you most likely have a long career ahead of yourself where you will be convincing, inspiring, cajoling, and helping others to see things differently, to act, to collaborate, to try new things. So don't fool yourself. It can get tiring. I think you know this already. And you're going to need stamina. There will be moments when you wonder if it's all worth the effort, if you're making enough of a difference, as we heard this morning, if you're being too idealistic, and so on. So one source of stamina is going to be the recognition that you're not the only one. And this event is so powerful in that way, and we heard it in the commitments. So find your community, and this is great as a community to help you with your stamina. And I want another source of stamina for you to be this. You must know that you are on the right side of history. So I had the great honor of speaking on a panel recently with John Elkington, one of the grandfathers of the sustainability movement, and he reminded the audience that, like most social transformations, we should view the sustainability movement as an 80-year transition. And it's one that we are maybe 30 or 40 years into. In moments when the daily battles seem too much, you should keep this in mind. To create a sustainable society, we are talking about change on the scale that human history has rarely, if ever, seen. But it will happen, and it is happening, and you're on the right side of history. Number two, don't believe that you lack power because you are young. The opposite is true. You are powerful because you are young. Sustainability is at its heart about intergenerational responsibility. And you are powerful more than you know because of the moral authority you have by virtue of the fact that this is all about the future. And it is your future. And there is great power in that, and people realize that. So it means you can authentically convey a sense of necessity and urgency that are crucial to setting more ambitious goals. And we definitely need this kind of urgency and ambition in all fields, all communities, all organizations. And one more thing on this point, which is I want you to make sure that you don't let them get away with lazy interpretations of sustainability. Okay? And I heard someone talking a little bit about this this morning, saying it a little differently, but about what it's like to get out there from an event like this and now start talking to other people and they don't share the same sense of urgency and perspective. And while people have, generally have good intentions, there are, my experience is that there's a lot of misconceptions about sustainability, and I'm going to point out 3 common misperceptions about sustainability. One is sustainability is a journey with no clear destination. You might hear that a lot. I say no, that's not true. Sustainability is a definable future state that we must achieve. So, for all of these 3 points, the thing is that your projects are going to show what we mean by sustainability, and so I want you to keep focusing on those projects. But we inevitably, even when we're really action-oriented, we also have to talk about sustainability. And we've already heard about how important narrative is. So when you're talking about it, I want you to be really, really attentive to these kind of issues and these kind of points in the way that you talk about it. The second one is sustainability is about achieving the right balance between social, environmental, and economic factors. You'll hear that a lot too. The right balance, the triple bottom line, the 3-legged stool, and so on. I say no. Sustainability is about transitioning our economy to a future state where it is no longer eroding social and ecological systems. It's not about balance, it's about transition. And that's important. and I'll talk about why in just a sec. You think so too, right? That brings up another little point, which is that I think that one of my least favorite words is actually the word environmentalist. So I'm a Bachelor of Commerce graduate from the University of Alberta, running an NGO with the word natural in it, based in Quebec. Am I an environmentalist? I don't know. And I'm not comfortable with the implication of being pigeonholed in a certain way that term often implies. And so that's what I'm getting at when I talk about balance. It's not about balancing environmental issues with social and economic issues. It's about transitioning our society and our economy to a future state where we are no longer undermining ecological systems and social systems. So sustainability issues like climate change are not environmental issues. It's a term that suggests that they can be compartmentalized and kept distinct from other variables. And the cooperators know this really well, and any of you who live in Calgary, the floods from last spring, those kind of weather events are not environmental issues. Those are economic issues, those are social issues, cultural issues, and environmental issues. So sustainability issues are the intersection of those things. And when we compartmentalize them, we isolate them in our minds, and we risk missing the greatest opportunities for transformation. Our negative impacts, doing less bad. And I again say no. Sustainability is about finding new ways to meet human needs, as in doing a lot more good. It's not about doing a little less bad, it's about doing a lot more good. You know this, and others do too, but they sometimes don't realize how important the difference is, and so they let themselves and others off the hook. So why does this matter so much? Well, it's the difference between seeing problems and seeing opportunities. This is really an entrepreneurial challenge. We have the great opportunity to create, to design, to find new ways to serve people and meet human needs. It's also the difference between accepting incremental change and seeking transformative change. And it's the difference between joyously celebrating what is possible and dreadfully accepting what is not. So what I'm talking about here is, I refer to, or I like to think of as sustainability literacy. And to be an effective sustainability leader, you're going to have to be an agent of sustainability literacy. What do I mean when I say sustainability literacy? I'm talking about the knowledge and mindset that help compel an individual to become deeply committed to building a sustainable future, and that allow him or her to make informed and effective decisions to this end. So specifically, you're talking about having an understanding of the seriousness of the crisis we face, the integrated nature, as I already said, of social, environmental, economic challenges, and the fundamentals of sustainability science. And a note about science, I was glad to hear someone talk about science earlier, because as a Bachelor of Commerce guy who didn't get much science training, I must say that I quickly realized how important it is, and I really encourage you to, even if it's not your area of study, to dabble a bit or a lot in the science of sustainability. I'll come back to this later. Anyway, the main point with all this is to be deeply committed to what you know, be passionate about it, and to take yourself seriously, as someone said this morning. And so now I want to move on to the less familiar territory, which is, as I said, listen, be empathetic, and know that you are wrong. Just before I do that, I have some water. I think it's time for another knock-knock joke. What do you think? I only created one myself, so this is one I read about. I must say I don't think it's quite as good, but... okay, knock-knock.
Who's there?
Sustainability-minded voter.
Sustainability-minded voter who?
Exactly. I think a lot of you were influenced by Ken Melamed over the last few days, because I was amazed at how many of you were talking about wanting to learn more about or get engaged in politics, and I'm really, really happy to hear that. Thank you, Ken. Okay, so perhaps listen, be empathetic, know that you're wrong. Perhaps wrong is the wrong word. But basically my message here is to be humble. It's just important as it is for you to draw confidence from being on the right side of history, from being highly sustainability literate. It is equally, if not more important, that you draw humility from what you don't know. I'm not talking about this because you're young. I'm talking about this because nobody has ever built a modern civilization that is sustainable in the way we're talking about it. So we need to learn our way into a sustainable society, all of us. And as much as we might know a whole lot about what we need to achieve, the truth is that we have very little idea of how to navigate this extraordinarily complex system to a future state that is sustainable. And I'm not just talking about learning about the efficiency, economic efficiency of carbon taxes or the health benefits of organic food and so on. I'm talking about how to shift governance and economic systems so that they're aligned with natural systems. If this were easy, it would have been done by now. And we would be there already. So learn, 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 and keep learning, and stay humble. Formally learn, yes, and also informally as participant observers in everything you do. This means being adept at putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Okay, and so I just want to do a little test here. How many of you have either lived abroad or traveled internationally? Yeah, see, not very surprised that you would be here. Because my experience is, and I really personally believe, that there's no better way to learn about how to put yourself in someone else's shoes than to get an international experience. So I'm really glad to know that, and not surprised at all, to know that so many of you have, and for those of you who haven't, go for it at some point. It's a skill set you don't even realize until you start to, exist in a different reality, and then you start to realize that that you can practice that skill set. So another reason why I think this is important is I think it's really important that we honor our elders. I think there's great wisdom and culture, great wisdom that in what has shaped our culture, and that we need to draw strength from the insights and wisdoms of achievements of the people who've come before us. So our society is, even though we're facing this great tenuous position, it's also in many ways way better off than it was in the past. And even though we're deeply committed to change and highly conscious of the problems that have been left to us, I think we can not let this dominate our psyche, and certainly not let this dominate the way we interact with people. There's too much knowledge and experience to be brought to bear by our elders to help solve the big problems. So engage them in the future you want to create by honoring them, definitely not by shaming or guilting them. And when I'm talking about honoring our elders, I don't know if any of you saw the speech that a couple weeks ago that Kevin Durant gave when he accepted the MVP award for the National Basketball Association. He's now the best basketball player in the world. Did anyone see it? A couple of you? It was an amazing speech. I really encourage you to go and Google that and watch it on YouTube. And it was amazing on a whole bunch of levels, but the kicker was at the very end when he honored his mother. And it'll bring you to tears for sure. I'm choking up just thinking about it. And it's that kind of honor that we don't necessarily always have to bring the person you're honoring to tears. That's great if you do. But it's that kind of authenticity in your respect for what has shaped you. I'm not just talking about your parents, but everything, your community and so on that has shaped you. So have a view of Kevin Durant's speech. It was amazing. The other reason is that change happens, my experience is that change happens when people are engaged, more so than when they're attacked. So shame and blame has its place, and it can often be a strategy that leads to the old narratives being reinforced. That's a hard sort of dance to play when you're an activist and you're so committed to the change that you want to see. But there's always a danger that we feed the kind of polarization on these issues that is actually entrenching some of the current status quo. So we lament the fact that there's so much polarization, and then we often go back and mostly work with people who already think the same way that we do. So change is going to have to be on a systemic level, and that means that we're going to have to be working with people who don't share our point of view, who don't share our priorities, and may not even be very polite back to you about your own priorities. And so I just think that what we have to be as change agents is respectful of that and find ways to engage with people like that. And we can talk more about that later. So this is, from my perspective, this is not a battle about good guys against the bad guys. As much as the media loves to play out any kind of, it's the industrialist against the environmentalist and so on. And of course there are some bad people. But most of us and most people do not set out every day with the intention of damaging social and ecological systems for their kids and grandkids. Quite the opposite. So instead, many of us, all of us, are living and working in an unsustainable system, and we are all grappling with, in our own ways, how do we work in that system? So keep this in mind. Be empathetic, find common ground, learn what matters to others, and connect to that. You'll be an even more effective change agent if you can develop that skill. So the other thing is that, the other reason is you'll affect change through your relationships. There might be a few of you who are going to invent the next amazing technology, and good on you if you do. But there's a lot of you and a lot of us who are going to be change agents through the relationships that we form primarily. So being respectful, humble, focused on listening, focused on serving others as your relationships mature, and constantly finding new connections, that's going to serve you really well. And the last reason is that it will sustain you. We heard about burnout, and we heard a lot of people talking about wanting to be realistic about what they can achieve and so on. And it's true. Consciously or subconsciously, most of us know that we're facing really serious challenges. We know our current efforts are mostly falling short. We know that we tend to sub-optimize our efforts because we're working within institutions and organizations where we have to work one organization at a time. And yet most of the issues are systemic, and so you can't really solve them one organization at a time. So all that complexity can really overwhelm, and it can inhibit us if we let it. So I think that if you're not authentically curious, empathetic, and so on, that my concern is that the real world, there's another one I hate, but the real world will slowly but surely start to chip away at your idealism. And perhaps without you even realizing it, until you've become a person who gets a little bit lazy about what is needed, or maybe even worse, is a little bit cynical about what can't happen. And I actually find that it's a bit of a paradox, but being humble, realizing how big the challenge is, realizing that you're not going to solve every issue, and doing so in a spirit of service, commitment to learning, will help you keep it real and stay positive and sustain the passion you have now. It might be sort of counterintuitive, but that's my experience. So it will help, for example, it will help you stay committed to the cause when life challenges become more, or life choices become more challenging, and they do. They do. Or it will help you forgive yourself if you have to prioritize other things for a little while. That's okay too. That's what life is about, is handling all these choices. So the answer to the earlier question at the start, the one from the tweet about how can we know so much and yet not have acted, I think is really related to this whole issue of complexity. The systems we're trying to change are so complex. And one piece that I saw in Fast Company magazine last year was called Turning Wicked Problems into Wicked Opportunities. And the futurist Frank Spencer challenged us all to consider complexity not as something to be avoided or killed, but something to be leveraged. So I have a quote here. Nature itself moves from simplicity to complexity as a sign of growth and maturity, he reminds us. Despite the tremendous problems we face, our world of expanding complexity is an indication that we are growing as well, When we adopt this view, we will begin to realize that complexity is actually the catalyst for new ideas that solve age-old problems. Growing complexity means that trends and data are amplifying and meshing at the speed of light, and those who are able to see the patterns that are emerging from this clustering of new ideas and events will be those who can pull transformational futures into the present. So think of complexity as the great opportunity, not as the great problem. And to do that, one of the things is hope, right? Hope is the most important ingredient for change, and that's why I find Frank Spencer's article so powerful. Complexity doesn't need to stifle hope. Instead, it can become the source of it. So for me, in this sense, when I'm going to get back, this is the only time I'm going to talk about the natural step. But when the founder of the natural step and his fellow scientists, when they first boiled down the challenge of building a sustainable society to 4 system conditions that could be serve as the design constraints for a sustainable society, that was 25 years ago. Their biggest contribution may not have been the science, the process, the rigor that are often cited as the kind of strength of the natural steps approach. I'm thinking that their biggest contribution may have been the space that this insight creates deep within people once they kind of come to realize it and experience it, to allow ourselves to be hopeful. We can describe a sustainable future clearly, and it makes sense. We are part of nature, and a sustainable society is possible. In fact, it's not nearly as complicated as we thought. It's only 4 design constraints to build a sustainable society. And I think you were exposed to them in the e-learning course and so on. If not, you can check it out. So armed with this mental model, we can handle the ridiculous complexity we face, and we train ourselves in the art of recognizing patterns and making sense of things, as Spencer tells us is required to turn wicked opportunities, or wicked problems into wicked opportunities. Nothing could be more empowering than that, I figure. So I'm closing now. My closing remarks are going to be a quote, another quote from a speech that I read 19 years ago when I was your age, some of your age. And there's no single piece of writing that has had a deeper effect on me than this speech that Václav Havel gave in 1995. Václav Havel is the playwright, dissident, and eventual president of the Czech Republic in the transition after communism. I'm amazed at how relevant this speech remains to me all these years later, and I encourage you to read it in its entirety. You can find it if you Google Václav Havel Philadelphia speech, as I did again last night on the way here. And here's the quote. This is just the quote at the end. In today's multicultural world, the truly reliable path to coexistence, to peaceful coexistence and creative cooperation must start from what is at the root of all cultures and what lies infinitely deeper in human hearts and minds than political opinion, convictions, antipathies, or sympathies. It must be rooted in self-transcendence. Transcendence as a hand reached out to those close to us, to foreigners, to the human community, to all living creatures, to nature, to the universe. Transcendence as a deeply and joyously experienced need to be in harmony even with what we ourselves are not, what we do not understand, what seems distant from us in time and space, but with which we are nevertheless mysteriously linked, because together with us all this constitutes a single world. Transcendence as the only real alternative to extinction. Wow. Why do I think this message is so important for you as sustainability changemakers? First of all, because you have found and are already engaged in your life's work. As much as I said earlier that time flies, and it does, it's also true that a life is a long time. So over that time, there are going to be many, many forks in the road, many pressures, many shifts in priorities. And I want to encourage you, if you're in for the long haul, which I think you all are, to be attentive to the development of what's in your heart in addition to what's in your head. Also, recognizing that it is a life's work helps one put the fierce urgency of today in proper perspective. And it can help us to get over ourselves a little bit. That's self-transcendence in a way. So finally, because effectiveness as a change agent is going to be more to do with how you be than what you know or even what you do. Don't let that be interpreted to mean that it doesn't matter what you do or what you know. It does, of course. But as you learn it and as you do it, be at least as attentive to how you are. Let yourself be mesmerized. Really connect with nature and the stars. And keep doing that. Seek to understand others, especially those with views and interests that are different than your own. You don't have to agree with them, but try really hard to understand them. And laugh. Don't take yourself too seriously, even as you work on the most serious of issues, and even though I just finished telling you you should take yourself seriously. Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say. Thank you. I'm going to tell my boys that that was because of the knock-knock joke. I think we have a few minutes for any questions, if you have questions.
I'll say that again. I was just going to say I really appreciate how you mentioned to connect back to nature, because that's what I'm all about, and I think that's super important, and it's just beneficial in many, many ways. So thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, no problem. And it's hard too. I mean, even though we all sense that, because you get busy and you live often in a city and it's not so easy. I've found having kids now, I'm more attentive to that than I was for a little while, because I want my kids to, to connect to nature, and that makes me a little more conscious about that. So it maybe comes and goes in different stages of life too, but I agree. Yep.
How did you get involved in
How did I get involved with the natural step? Okay, well, so I'll try not to make this too long of a story, but I was, my first job after graduating was with Van City Credit Union, cooperative. Yeah, what a great organization, another one. In the corporate social responsibility department, and one of the first things I got to do was go to a conference it was on the natural step in Portland. So I was exposed to this, and Ray Anderson spoke, and Paul Hawken, and all these amazing, inspiring people from the early days of the sustainability movement. And I was, around your age then, and a couple years maybe older. And there were only two of us who were sort of what we considered young Canadians at that event. And we thought that was a real shame, so we committed to, sort of like what you have done here, made a commitment to ourselves. We committed to, for the next year, to get more young Canadians down to the next such conference. And it was happening in Atlanta. And so we started raising some money and talking to some sponsors and so on, and we couldn't believe the response we got. And we ended up raising enough money to send 35 young Canadians down to Atlanta, all expenses paid. Plus we had a 3-day post-conference conference about how can we bring all this back to Canada. And there's a little lesson in there too, by the way, because that was still 3 years before I ended up working for the Natural Step. But the lesson there is in the, and I know you know this already and you're going to experience it here, is in the power of those networks that are created at these kind of events. Because of those 35 young Canadians, at least half of them are still really, really prominent in my personal and professional networks. That's 15 years later. Esther was one of them, Esther Speck. and there are a number of others as well. So anyway, we did that. It took a couple of years, but we ended up, let's say, inheriting the Natural Step in Canada from the people who had set it up in the first place as a volunteer board. And my colleague and I, after doing our grad studies in Sweden, we made this our first post-grad studies effort. And I think in some ways we did a lot of what you were talking about this morning, or someone was, being a counter-narrative, because it was not paid at first, and there was, the charitable status had lapsed, and it was a pretty challenging thing to restart really. But we knew that it was a good thing, and there was an element of, we were talking earlier about if you build it, they will come. And so we got to a point where people we would talk to enough people that we thought we were wise and could give us some counsel and advice about how to do this, that we decided to try to convene them. Before we got there, we were thinking, we got to get it a little further along before we convene them, because we got to make a really good impression. And then finally we just decided, you know what, let's just do it now. If we build it, they will come. And that's exactly what happened. That group ended up, all of them volunteering to become our first board of directors. Bob Willard was one of them. And then we kind of carried on from there. So there you go. That was probably a bit more than you bargained for.
Hi there, Chad. I just wanted to thank you for helping us get comfortable with paradoxes in your keynote speech. I think you reminded me of a lot of things that I've learned but forgotten, and so that was really helpful. I guess the question I wanted to ask was one I asked Tamara in a conversation yesterday. Could you please give us a personable explanation of what you think your job is and what you do? Less so a job description and more what you'd like it to be.
Okay, wow.
Thank you.
Yeah. I bet Tamara's answer was really good. Okay, well, I think my job is really about helping people and groups of people to imagine a future that's desirable and sustainable and so on, and to work together to try to get there. I mean, we do it in a whole bunch of different ways, whether it's through courses or whether it's training, or whether it's through projects or advising the cooperators on their business strategy and so on. But really, it's about helping them to see possibility in being more committed and more progressive around sustainability, either as an individual, as an organization, or as a group of organizations. I don't know, that still sounded a bit too much like a job description, I think. Yeah?
So thanks a lot, Chad. I think what you had to say was really inspirational, and if I think about who I idolize and who I think is a hero and someone who I'd love to work with one day, you're certainly front of mind and someone who I admire. So thanks a lot for coming. When you talked about complexity, I felt this tension inside of me to what the challenges that I've been through, and when I'm trying to communicate with people, I often find I'm trying to make it more simple and smarter. So I was wondering if you could talk about what the role is in simplicity dealing with such complex problems.
Yeah, it's not easy at all. I mean, that's, I think, one of many brilliant insights of Bob Willard, is helping us, all of us who are so committed to these things, to really boil it down and speak the language of the audience we're trying to connect with and that kind of thing. But it's a learned skill. There's no, recipe. When Dr. Robert, Karl-Henrik Robert, who founded The Natural Step 25 years ago in Sweden, when one of the very first articles they published on the science that underpins the approach, they called it simplicity without reduction. And so it's this notion that we need to simplify, but we need to simplify without reducing the complexity. And too often what we tend to do is we all sense the need to simplify, but in our effort to do so, we compartmentalize, or we create silos or whatever. And so I think that's really one of the brilliant insights of the idea of driving your change effort with principle-based understanding of success, because we don't have to agree on all the details, and you don't have to convince everyone about all the details. But trying to create the conditions where you can have a conversation that allows you to focus on success principles I think is really, really important, and is a way to try to simplify without reducing. I can't remember now if you've taken the e-learning course. I think so. Okay, so in the e-learning course, there's the analogy of chess, right? Where you know success is defined on a principle level with checkmate. The game is complex. It's moving all the time. It's dynamic. And still, you're always driven by a sense of the principle of success, and that allows you to adapt and so on, and react to the fact that the circumstances are changing. So I find, and that isn't easy either. But really, now back to this question: if my job really is about trying to create, wherever possible, the conditions to engage in a conversation that's about that. That's about let's define success using principles, because it's not necessarily inherent to people, and everyone's busy and so on, that it's not easy to create those conditions. So that's probably a whole other discussion of how do you create those conditions. But really, I think that's the kind of conversation you want to try to have.
Hi there, Chad. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you. The ending quote about the importance of self-transcendence and staying connected to nature and the stars really resonated with me, so thanks very much for that. You said something else about many of us will be agents of change through the relationships we create, and that also was very powerful for me, because just yesterday during the Pro Action Cafe, I wrote in big letters in my book, how do I make use of all the connections that I have? And how do I start bridging those connections together? Because I mean, so many people can use each other and as resources, and build our strength. So how do we make use of these connections? How do we start building them and making use of them?
Yeah, great. Well, you're going to do it, by the way, and you're going to maybe do it without really having a clear answer to your own question, certainly from me. But you're going to do it because it's going to be your instinct. You're going to know that those people are the sources of the next great idea, or the idea that builds from this idea and that one and connects to something even better. Yeah, I think, I mean, I suspect, and I suspect that your ability to connect and stay connected is going to be easier in this day and age. Oh God, I sound old. Than it was for me and my colleagues and peers 20 years ago. And yet we did. A lot of us we're off in, senior positions in lots of different kinds of organizations. And so part of it is just being really deliberate and valuing that. And when you get really busy, I mean, some of it is ritual, like you just count on the fact that once every year you're going to make sure you get together with so-and-so, even if there's no agenda. And when so that your connection is personal, it's not just professional. And suddenly you have kids, and now your kids are playing together, and so on. Like it's amazing how that happens. So I think part of it is using what's available to you, and you all know that even more than I. Even though I'm sure you were really impressed that I read your tweets, but also being really deliberate and conscious about building that into your routines and the relationship building. It's something I learned from my father, I must say. He was an executive recruiter, like a headhunter. His whole job was networks. And not in the sense of, I realized, I mean, growing up in Bachelor of Commerce degree, you learned about your contacts and making sure you make use of your contacts and so on. And that sounds so crass, and that's not what it is. And I learned this from my dad. It's not about taking advantage of your contacts. It's about building relationships with people. And so, my dad was on the board of the United Way with some guy he played hockey with when he was 16. And there's all kinds of things like that. And you really need to recognize that and prioritize connecting with people as human beings, not just as representatives of organizations.
Hi, Kelly Hodgins from BC. Thank you so much. Let me just kind of articulate this, but I really liked the way that you framed that we shouldn't be framing this as sort of an antagonistic relationship, that most people don't wake up setting out to destroy the world, and I think that's really important. But and we've been talking about not standing up with our megaphone kind of a little bit this conference, but how do you, so keeping in mind that we don't have this antagonistic relationship between environmentalists and destroyers of the earth, how do we communicate with those who are just sort of apathetic? Like, what are some strategies that you use in your life, so that we're not alienating people with our megaphones, but that we're confronting those who are just apathetic? Great
question. Well, so one thing is there's still a need for megaphones. So don't take that. Yeah, don't take this as a we need megaphones for sure. But I think part of it is that is to focus where there's energy to move. And don't, what is it? What's the expression? Don't boil the ocean or whatever. One of our advisors for one of our programs, he describes it, I think, as there are make it happen people, there are let it happen people, and there are watch it happen people. Or maybe those are the same. And then there are block it happen people. And there must be one for apathy. I can't remember what it is. Maybe that's watch. And he basically advised us, like, don't spend too much time on the block it happen people or the watch it happen people. Spend your time as much as you can on either those who are going to help you make it happen, or those who are at least going to help make it happen, or sort of watch it and support it as it unfolds. That doesn't mean, I know that's counter to what I said before, seek people who have the opposing views. And I do think it's important to find people who have opposing views, and often they won't be apathetic. They will be go-getters, just in a different way, in a different direction. So, I think this is really the big, grand challenge of the sustainability movement overall. So I wish I had an easier answer than that. But really, I think it's the best you can do is model what you want to do and how you want to be, and some of what I said before about really trying to go out of your way to understand people's perspectives and create the conditions where you have the chance to do that, even if it's apathetic. And you don't have to convince everyone.
Hi, unfortunately this may be a little redundant because that was kind of my question, so I tried to rephrase it.
Okay.
But I guess in the situations when the success of your project depends on the people who just plain disagree with you and tell you no. So let's say if your project was focused on getting it through to the city municipality and you're building up to this moment and then they just said no.
Yeah.
So have you been faced with those situations, and how have you faced rejection on that level?
Yeah, I have been. Of course, part of it is how you get to that point. Trying to be as strategic as possible about when that moment arrives, having some people already on your side in that discussion, so you know beforehand that you have allies in that meeting or in that discussion. But if that's not possible, and it often isn't, then there's an element of this that's just about licking your wounds and coming back again later. And drawing lessons. That would be. I love the fact that so many references to failure or fail forward were shared today. Because I think that's really, really key is, see each failure as a learning opportunity. What are you going to do next time that's a little different? And that's hard to take in the moment because your project is what you're so passionate about and so on. But we have, at the Natural Step, we have an ethic and also an actual resource around being a learning organization, or we call it developmental evaluation. And it's really about, as we're trying to develop things, constantly learning and adapting, and especially in the case of failure. So what is it? Fail hard, or fail fast, and fail cheap. So that's partly about don't put all your eggs in one basket, but it's also just about, be able to get back up quickly and move on to the next thing, or draw your lesson that'll be, applicable in a different context. So I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's a very good answer, but it's partly about being really, really strategic to try to make it successful as best you can, and have allies and all of that beforehand, being really well prepared. And then part of it is sometimes that still doesn't work, and then you just have to learn. That's all you can do, really.
Hi. So something that really resonated with me was when you said that we live to survive our paradoxes, and that...
Oh, I didn't say that. Gordon Downey did.
When you quoted that, and this is something you said, I think, authentically, is that no one has ever built a modern society the way we're trying to, right? And that sparked a reflection, that made me think of, as humans, we only try to move forward when we are in our critical state, in the most critical state. So, we have the First World War, and that triggered all sorts of advancements, and then the Second World War, right? And then when we reached the Cold War, there was this ambiguity, right? So it was the Soviet Union and this, the Western societies, like, who's gonna go first? Who's gonna go first? And everyone was just freaking out. So I guess my question would be, what's gonna be? What do you think are the milestones to start solving that ambiguity, right? So what's gonna be that Gorbachev reform that's going to start facilitating a process to resolve that ambiguity and start, a dialogue with nature, I guess. I feel that to some degree we're kind of threatening the democracy of nature as a complex system, right? So I think that my question is, what do you think are the milestones to start solving that ambiguity?
I think, I think that part of it will be, it could very well be that it's some big crisis. We hit, if you remember the funnel from the e-learning course, we hit the walls of the funnel somehow, and so on. But in some ways we're already doing that, and we could say that it's not changing fast enough. But I also think that the milestones are happening. And that's the thing about the complexity is, everything is changing so fast that new technologies and new perspectives and so on are emerging so quickly. So, it'll be hard to pinpoint to any one thing like you can with the end of the Cold War or something like that, I think, because this is it's not about two polar sides, trying to battle it out. This is about a whole shift in the way we live. But I think there will be moments of technology where certain, and I'm not the kind of person that says all our solutions are in technology, but those will be indicators. For example, energy technology. When energy technology is democratized, and we can produce our own power, locally, regionally, in a distributed way, from renewable sources. I don't think that future is very far off, and that will make a humongous transition in terms of the shift overall. So it could be little things like that, or big things like that, that that some historian looks back and says, well, that was sort of the key milestone. But it could also be some big, terrible event, and I hope it's not that. Okay, Tom says one more. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I know I've spoken already. Does anyone else have a question?
Looks like you're on.
Go ahead.
Okay. Just to make this quick, I was wondering if you could quickly speak to strategy for those of us who don't know, and the role that it plays in change making. Thank you.
Okay. I got to invite you to a 4-day course on that. Yeah, well, I mean, let's see, I think boil it down to there's strategy and then there's being strategic. And they're two sides of the same coin, but as an individual, being strategic, from my standpoint, starts first and foremost with being clear about what you're trying to achieve. And that seems so logical, of course, but you can't be, by definition, you can't be strategic. You can't make strategic choices unless you know where you're going. Because, otherwise any road will take you there because you don't know where you're going. So that's really the first thing, is being really, really clear about vision, about, success principles, as I was talking about earlier, and so on. And then the backcasting approach that, that was you used, I think, a little bit in the design of this conference, but also appeared in the e-learning course, is really a process for being strategic. It's about beginning with the end in mind, having that using that as a reference point to understand where you are today, and then being really, I guess, smart about choosing the things that are going to bridge that gap. And we always talk about the fact that you need to choose things that are steps in the right direction, that are flexible platforms, as in, you're not going to achieve success in one move. So don't kid yourself about that, but take the steps that are going to leave you the greatest degree of room to maneuver as things evolve. And third, look at the return on investment. So again, doesn't do anyone any good if you're trying to become more sustainable and you go bankrupt in the process of doing it, for example, as an organization. So try to make those moves in a way that you're balancing the generation of both financial but also political and social return on your investment. And then it's a step-by-step process of working towards your vision. That's my little backcasting 101, which would, my answer to any question about strategy would be about backcasting. I think that's it. Thanks, folks.